Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones, back here today, a bye week edition. Purdue football is on their bye week as 2/3 of the season have already passed. 8 games down, 4 to go, and we're going to take a look at all things Purdue football here on the show today. Of course, we have to talk about what happened in Madison last weekend, one of the more deflating losses I've seen from Purdue football in some time, but we'll look at where Purdue is as a whole. 2/3 of the season have come and gone, and it's crazy how fast the playing portion goes, but if you can believe it, we only have 4 more games to go. Talk about where Purdue is, overall thoughts, and where Purdue goes. November presents plenty of opportunity still. We will answer your questions and the big news today. And we had a lot of engagement, positive, negative, all sorts of reactions on Twitter about Purdue's 2023 football schedule that just got announced. So plenty to get to this week here on the bye. If you don't, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. Participate in Q&As, give me some feedback on there, and then subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, we will have 2 episodes again. Monday, it is the Purdue basketball preview episode. I know I've had a few people reach out, ask when that is coming. That will be on Monday. We will dive into the Purdue basketball preview episode and look at what should be an interesting season of Boilermaker basketball. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss that. Last weekend up in Madison, though, the final score said Wisconsin 35, Purdue 24, and it's almost unfortunate that was the score, because when folks look back at the season, that doesn't reflect what kind of game this was. Purdue was absolutely outclassed in this game, every sense of the word. The score just doesn't reflect how much of a blowout this was. I maybe I'm the problem. This is 2 years in a row now where I've picked Purdue to go up to Madison and beat the Badgers. Purdue to beat the Badgers. I picked Purdue to win at home in 2021. And Purdue was thoroughly outclassed in both those games. Of course, part of that is Wisconsin's identity. They are tough. They are hard-nosed. They run the ball incredibly well. And I thought Purdue would do a better job against the run. They really didn't. Wisconsin still got 6 yards a carry. You're not going to win many games giving up 6 yards per carry. As we said on the show last week, I thought Graham Mertz was vulnerable. He wasn't. His receivers were wide open, but he had a nice game. Incredibly efficient, found the open man. He did a really nice job. Purdue's defense didn't play well, and we saw that this offense really wasn't capable of going out and winning the game. For the second straight year, Wisconsin forced Aiden O'Connell into a bad day. Kind of the same deal as last year, where, on the surface, O'Connell completed 75% of his passes last year against Wisconsin. And this season, 31 for 46, that's 67%, 320 yards. But those 3 picks were killer. That first pick did it. I mean, let's face it, when the game was 14-0, 4 minutes in, did you really think Purdue had a chance to win? How easily Wisconsin went down the field and scored, and then Purdue throws a pick 6. Teams like Wisconsin aren't the teams that you are going to climb out of a 14-0 hole against, because they're so dominant with the ball. And unless you can really force Graham Mertz to make mistakes, they're just going to eat you alive. And that's exactly what they did. It was 21-0, and at that point, Purdue was just playing not to get blown out cosmetically. I guess credit to them for not. Purdue certainly played hard. They didn't quit. I'll give them that much. Charlie Jones, Payne Durham had nice days. Devin Mockabee, another 100-yard game. I mean, that guy plays hard as can be. 23 carries, a $108, a touchdown. Purdue didn't quit, but what we are seeing is just, even though Purdue's depth has been built up more this year than it has in years past, Purdue still doesn't have that much talent to cycle through players when injuries really start to strike. I mean, we saw Camden Childers, who I'm sure is a great young man out of Fort Wayne, playing corner, who's a converted walk-on wide receiver, playing corner for more than a half in a Big Ten game. I mean, that just shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be. And that's kind of what's frustrating here. You don't want to look too much into the results of one game, because as we'll get to, Purdue still has everything ahead of it. And if you want to find the silver lining of this, it's that Purdue lost this game and still controls its own destiny in the Big Ten West. But I think what's more frustrating is that you're in a spot where you really don't feel like you're any closer to Wisconsin than you were when Jeff Brom's era started. And I don't necessarily view that as an indictment on Brom himself, but Purdue's just not all that close to this level. And when you have a 16-game losing streak against an opponent, it's very, very frustrating, especially when, you should have won that game in 2018. 2017, you were right in there. 2019, 2021, 2022, you've been blown out in all three of those games, kinda. It's really frustrating. It really is. So I understand, the overall vibe around Purdue's fan base about this game was incredibly negative. I think that's justified. I really do. And I'm someone who's normally pretty optimistic and pretty positive. But, when you have a secondary where, I don't know what happened to Corey Trice, Jamari Brown. They both go out early with injuries. Cam Allen really struggled again. He has not had a good year. The secondary just really, really struggled. How many big plays did Wisconsin have? And that's Wisconsin. They're not a big play program. Just a really, really bad day. Mitchell Finneran, another missed field goal. Not good. And that one, any hope Purdue had, I probably wouldn't have settled for a field goal there even, but when you blow a field goal, chip shot that is, down 14-0, that game was over at that point. Wisconsin goes down and scores. A frustrating day. Purdue made Wisconsin look really, really good, and Wisconsin is better under Jim Leonard, but they're still not great. This isn't some great Wisconsin team compared to what they've had in years past. Disappointing by Purdue. Disappointing all around. And I certainly understand why fans are frustrated. But you do look at where Purdue is now, though, and I guess this is where we'll kind of transition into looking at where Purdue is right now. They're 5-3, and we're through 2/3 of the season. 8 games in, they're 5-3. Overall, I think that's about right, and I think that's where most people who looked at it realistically saw Purdue being at this point. Probably a 4-4 to 6-2, somewhere in their team. You really weren't finding many who weren't Purdue fans who had Purdue at 9-3 or better. I think most had Purdue around 7-5, 8-4. So this is about where you expect Purdue to be. I think you have to put it into perspective too. Purdue is 1-2. And They had to play a game without their starting quarterback after that. And they had a month where we looked at October at the start and said, boy, 2-2 would probably be a good month here. And they went 3-1. That's pretty good. Purdue's in a pretty good spot. Purdue's gone through a whole lot of injuries, too. You look at some of the guys Purdue has not really had all season. Brock Thompson, someone who, Purdue looked at as someone who could be a consistent guy in the receiving room. I don't think he's a 1 by any means, but, my goodness, Purdue's desperately needed a number 2 receiver. Thompson hasn't been around at all, really. King Doru missed a good amount of this time. Now, Devin Mockabee has filled in better than anyone could have imagined and is probably the best running back on the team. I'll admit I was wrong about that for a while. But still, missing King Doru, not ideal. You missed Jalen Graham for quite a while. Your best defensive player missed 4 games in there. Not good. Who else? O.C. Brothers is missing some time. Purdue's got a couple offensive linemen they've lost. This has been a pretty banged up team. You've had a lot of turnover at the defensive back spots. Just weird stuff going on there. So I think you look at where Purdue is, and it's hard to be upset about 5-3. Of course, you can always play the what if game, right? What if Purdue beat Penn State? What if Purdue beat Syracuse? I, for one, think the Syracuse loss is a million times more frustrating, more inexcusable, whatever term you want to use. I think Syracuse is the worst loss of the two, but those two are ones you'd love to have back. At the same time, you were probably fortunate to beat Florida Atlantic to some degree. Purdue didn't play well in that game by any means. You survived a game at Minnesota where you really didn't play great. You were a cat with 9 lives against Maryland, and you needed a really nice drive to hold on to the ball against Nebraska. If Nebraska got the ball back down 6, I think they were going to score. So you can look at it both ways. Yes, Purdue could probably be 7-1 here. Purdue could be like 2-6, 3-5 if the ball bounces a couple of different ways, and it's a whole different vibe around this season. This is a team that has incredibly high variance. What you see in one game doesn't always, or really ever, roll over into the next. The defense that we saw against Minnesota, against Maryland, nowhere to be seen against Nebraska or Wisconsin. The passing game that we saw against Syracuse and that we saw against Nebraska, nowhere to be seen against Wisconsin. The run game has been kind of inconsistent. Maccabees stabilized that, but you look at Maryland, nothing going on the ground. The defense, there's so much to it, but it's just been frustrating. It's been a lot of highs and lows. So with this team, you don't know what you're going to get week to week. But I think overall, you have to look at this and think it's been a pretty good season for Purdue, because for really the first time, they're going to November with a legitimate shot at the West. I'm trying to remember back to 2018 because it's the only year where Purdue really had a shot at the West. But if I remember right, Purdue won that game against Iowa and then had an outside shot before they went up to Minnesota and got blasted in the snow. So I think this is really the first and what probably will be the last time that Purdue has a legitimate shot at the West. And that's something that should be celebrated. That's something that, Purdue could not have been further away from competing in the West when Jeff Brom took this job over. So to be competing, that's a very positive thing. I think you've done a great job at home. You've had great turnouts from your home crowd. There's been good energy. People are still excited about this program. it's been a good season, I think. Yes, it's been frustrating. Yes, there have been highs and lows. But I think you look at this, and through the first 2 months, I think you should be pleased with where Purdue is. November is ahead. November's as big of a month as Purdue's seen. A, you have a chance to win the West. B, a lot of those games are games you should win. All of them are games you could win. This is a massive month for Purdue football. I am not in the boat that thinks that you can just chalk up Iowa as a win. I don't care how bad Spencer Petras is. I don't care how strong the nepotism around that program is. I don't care if they give the whole operation to Brian before the Purdue game. You always have to be cautious with them, especially with that defense, and especially given what we just saw from Purdue against Wisconsin. You know, the name of the game for Purdue against Iowa has been a receiver going off. Charlie Jones is going to be the guy you look at for that. Charlie Jones is known very well around Iowa, and he's also really dinged up. If you didn't hear what Jeff Brom said, right before the game, he wouldn't comment on whether Charlie Jones practiced last week, and then after the game, he revealed he didn't. The guy didn't get on the practice field once, still went out and caught 10 passes for 100 yards, but he's dinged up. Payne Durham's dinged up. You'd hope to get him as healthy as possible. This bye week is coming at a great time for Purdue. You wish it could have come a week earlier, but regardless, the bye week is coming at a great time. But I'm still, you're 1 pick 6 against Iowa away from making that game really hard on yourself. So I'm not ready to chalk that up as a win. You go to Illinois, which is shaping up to be the showdown of the year in the Big Ten West. Probably a game that if Purdue can beat Iowa, will decide the division. And if Purdue doesn't beat Iowa, then I guess Illinois is probably the Big Ten West champions at that point. Crazy. I didn't think I'd be saying that, but here we are. You go from Illinois, and that's a game Purdue can win. I think Illinois is a really good team. The style they play, given what Purdue just saw against Wisconsin, is undoubtedly concerning. But I think that's a game that Purdue can win. You finish with Northwestern and Indiana. They are the 2 worst teams in the Big Ten. I don't think it's all that close. Those are 2 games that you should absolutely win. But the difference between going into those at 5-5 versus 6-4 or 7-3, very, very different. Very different vibes when Purdue comes to Ross-Ade to play Northwestern after Illinois. Overall, look, I think you should expect to go 3-1 in this month. Purdue's going to be favored in 3 games. They'll be a dog at Illinois, but they'll be a favorite in the other 3. I think Purdue should expect at this point to go 8-4. And if you said that before the season, that's a good year. I know there were a lot of folks out there saying, 9-10 wins with this schedule. Anything can happen. I get that. But 8-4 would still be a really, really good season for this group, especially given how many question marks have emerged. Now, again, anything is possible. We saw Purdue play really poorly on Saturday. If they play that poorly against Iowa, they will lose. If they play that poorly against Northwestern or Indiana, you open up possibilities. But we've seen how well Purdue can play. I think. I'll leave it at that. I think we have. And I think Purdue playing well is good enough to go 3-1 in the next 4. And I think it's good enough to beat Illinois. I really do. I don't think there's any reason why Purdue can't beat Illinois, but they just got to get out of their own way. And sometimes that's the hardest thing for a team, is to get out of their own way. But as we sit here now in a bye week, you have to try to get you have to flush that Wisconsin loss as quickly as you can because there's so much left to play for. I mean, this could be an absolutely record book season for Purdue, I guess. Probably not the right word, but it could be a year you look back on quite fondly if you can get to Indianapolis. Will they do it? We'll see. But we'll be here all along to document the journey. Hopping in to the Q&A portion of our bye-week episode. Thanks to those of you who sent questions over. First one's a good one. One that we haven't talked about as much as we probably should have here. Has Garrett Miller's injury affected the offense as much as we thought it would? Also, what about Elijah Canyon? As far as Garrett Miller goes, I really do think so. Because he's a legitimate pass-catching threat. He's a really good athlete at that tight end spot. You wouldn't be relying on Payne Durham as much as you are. I mean, the guy's beat up as can be. He's playing a ton of snaps every week. You're leaning on him a ton, and he's gutting it out. Man, could you imagine if Charlie Jones wasn't on this team? You'd be missing Garrett Miller like crazy. Just because he's another guy who's a playmaker. So I do think Garrett Miller was a big loss, but I think you have to give a lot of credit to Jones and Durham for how well they've carried this pass catcher unit. TJ Sheffield's been fine. Mershawn Rice had a nice game, but as a whole, this has probably been an underwhelming group of pass catchers, and I think Garrett Miller would certainly have been a nice benefit to that, not to mention his ability as a blocker at tight end. That would certainly have helped as well. As far as Elijah Canyon goes, we saw him for a series or two against Penn State. Nothing since. I have no idea what's going on there. But, you'd love to have him back. He's a guy who, looking at his physical tools, his height, his size, I really like what he brings to the table. Granted, I haven't seen much of him. No one has. But maybe he'll be back. Maybe he won't. But regardless, he's someone who you'd love to have in a wide receiver room where nobody is separating. I think that's certainly a concern. How about this? The main reason for the secondary struggles, is it a new cornerback coach? Ashton Yabodi, is it a new defensive play caller? Ron English says it's basically the same secondary as last year, but it didn't struggle this much. Yeah, I agree. The secondary struggles are bizarre, especially when you factor in that Purdue's best corner, Corey Trice, missed most of last season. You had Dedrick Mackey, Jamari Brown, Chris Jefferson at the corner and nickel spot. Last year, Cam Allen and Marvin Grant back deep. This year, Chris Jefferson bounced around a little bit. He is currently not playing. Jeff Brom said it probably isn't likely he'll be back for Iowa. I can't claim to know what's going on there, but it doesn't sound ideal for him getting back on the field for Purdue. So you're just banged up at this spot. I mean, you brought in T. Denson from Kansas State. He hasn't done much. He hasn't played at all. He may not play this season. Bryce Hampton from Adams State. He hasn't done a whole lot to this point. Trice has been good. Jamari Brown's been really up and down, as has Reese Taylor. I think your corner depth, I think you probably wanted Taylor to be better than he has been. I think moving Chris Jefferson to safety was solid, but then when injuries struck and they had to move him back to nickel and slot Sanusi Kane in back there, I think there's been a lot of moving parts. And yes, Cam Allen has really struggled. He has not tackled well this year at all. That's been a big negative for this group. So I think, I don't know that there's a singular main reason, but I will say this much, and it doesn't excuse the tackling, but it doesn't excuse the long completions, but Purdue's pass rush isn't what it was last year either. George Karlaftis, big loss. DeMarcus Mitchell, another big loss. And we didn't see him much. He didn't play all that much. But when he did, he was very effective. Kydron Jenkins was a lot better when he had those one-on-one matchups because George Karlaftis drew half the line to himself. When you don't have as good of a pass rush, you put more pressure on your secondary. And if they can't handle it, it'll get exposed a lot easier if you don't have a pass rush. And so far this year, Purdue doesn't have that much of a pass rush. Break down your opinion of how you see the West shaking out. At this point, I've got to go Illinois, just because, they're in a spot where I do expect them to lose at Michigan. And that would be their second conference loss. That would put them there with Purdue. But they have the home field against Purdue. They look a little bit more of a solid team, a little more consistent week to week than what Purdue has been. I have to go with them. Additionally, they don't have that difficult of a slate left outside of Michigan. So while Purdue has a fairly light load, Illinois doesn't have a real heavy schedule either. I'll go with them. If chaos strikes, I do think Wisconsin is probably going to play really well down the stretch. Now, they don't have the tiebreaker against Illinois. They have 3 Big Ten losses. Probably difficult to see anyone besides Purdue or Illinois getting to Indianapolis now, but you never know. I'll go Illinois and then Purdue as the 2 favorites to go to Indy, with Illinois number 1. And I had a question, who's a more all-around team between Purdue or Illinois? I think right now you have to go Illinois. They have one of the best defenses in America. They have one of the best running backs in America. Tommy DeVito has been better than I anticipated. He's been better with the ball than I thought. He's been better at, and I knew he was a decent runner, but he's been nice in some of their RPO schemes. He's been really good, and that Illinois offense has been effective in a different way than what Brett Bielema did at Wisconsin and Arkansas. It's a more fun, more dynamic offense, and that defense is downright nasty. They've been fantastic this year. Probably going a little underreported how good that Illinois defense has been. Now, they haven't played top-level competition by any means, but they've been phenomenal when they've had to be. So I'll go with them for sure. Now, how they lost to Indiana's beyond me. I think Purdue probably has a higher ceiling. If you get a really good day from Aiden O'Connell and that run defense is what it's capable of, although I don't know. Last 2 weeks haven't been great for Purdue's D. I think Purdue might have the higher ceiling, but in terms of all around just being solid and being consistent, definitely the Illini. Had a really good one here, with another walk-on making an impact in Camden Childers. Is there any concern with how much Purdue relies on walk-ons? And it's not a fun question to answer because, you got to give these kids credit for working hard and getting on the field. And you look at it, clearly Devin Mockabee is a very talented player who probably shouldn't have been a walk-on. He belongs as a legitimate Big Ten starting running back, I think. Aiden O'Connell, same as a quarterback. Charlie Jones was a walk-on at Iowa. Those guys all certainly belong, but I think when you look at situations like plugging Camden Childers in back there, or with Andrew Sawinski breaking out at the receiving, at receiver, it's great that they trust Sawinski, and it's great that Childers is capable of getting out there. But I think especially you look at receiver. Why aren't these talented players that Purdue has recruited beating out a walk-on? I mean, why isn't Deion Burks definitively beat out Andrew Sawinski? Same with Abdur Rahman Yassin. Same with guys like a Preston Terrell. These guys who Purdue recruited, they gave a scholarship to. Where are they? In the defensive backfield, they've been beat up. But, like where's Brandon Callaway? Javon Grigsby got on the field. But, man, I mean, you do want to see your recruits play at a high level. And I've talked about it running back. Purdue's relying on 2 walk-ons there, both of whom Maccabee's been unreal. Scholarship him for sure when you can. Downing, I think you do the same. He's solid. But you've had bad luck there as well. Jaquez Cross didn't last. Tyreek Murphy didn't last. Who was it? Was it Anderson? Was that his name who decommitted? There's been a lot of moving parts there. Aiden O'Connell's a really good quarterback. So I don't want to judge too much there, but yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's good to have a good walk-on program, and Purdue certainly seems to, but you want the guys that you're giving your scholarships to beat them out. That's kind of why you're giving them the scholarships, is so they can beat out the guys that you don't. And I finally had a question that just came in as I'm recording this. Let me pull it up real quick. Is there a quarterback out there who is being underutilized someplace else who you would love if they went into the portal and transferred to Purdue next year? It's hard. I just saw this as I'm recording, so I didn't have time to put a ton of thought into this. Obviously, there are programs who have some depth. You look at Georgia, who has Stetson Bennett starting and then 2 highly touted quarterbacks behind him and another one on the way. I mean, yeah, you look at a situation like that, you'd love to get one of those guys. I think also, though, you look at the group of 5 level. Is there someone who's done well there that you think can move up? Or, really you can look anywhere. It is crazy how, these quarterbacks moving around can really strike anywhere. I don't have anyone top of mind right now, but I do think you probably ought to look at adding a quarterback for next year. I know Purdue added this kid, Max Brown. What's his name, right? Something Brown, Matt Brown, to their class. Look, I don't know. I think Purdue needs to look at adding a transfer quarterback, and I think if you can, you would like to add someone who can start next year, who will at least push Allen and Alamo for that starting job. All right, closing out the show tonight, my favorite topic, some scheduling in general in college football. Purdue's 2023 schedule was released today. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you pull it up while you're listening. I'm not going to read it off. That's boring, but it is brutal. Obviously, word started to leak that Purdue was going to get stuck with both Michigan and Ohio State in the non-conference. And to say that's not ideal is an absolute understatement. And you get them within, you get a bye week and a game against Nebraska. And between the two, Ohio State comes to West Lafayette. You go to Michigan. But that's brutal. You have Wisconsin on September 23rd. I think you want some more time to settle in before you get them. You get Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, 3 games in a row, and then Ohio State as your 7th straight game. You're going to be beat up as can be by then. But the non-conference schedule, we've known for some time, and it drives me crazy. And there's a lot of discourse on Twitter about this today, and I do understand, those who say it's a more entertaining non-conference schedule to watch. If you don't know, Purdue plays Fresno State, they play at Virginia Tech, and Syracuse comes to West Lafayette. Obviously, West Virginia, a return game from 2015. Syracuse, a return game from this season. Fresno State, bye game. Shouldn't be a bye game. That's just a difficult opponent. And I guess that's where I'll start. I don't see why you're scheduling one of the best G5, most consistent G5 programs out there. That's a dangerous game to play. It's like when people schedule North Dakota State, why do you do that? You can schedule any FCS team you want. Why North Dakota State? Why did teams used to schedule Boise State? I mean, you're playing a dangerous game there, and then you're playing two Power 5 programs in the same year, neither of which is great. I mean, Virginia Tech has been kind of a mess since Frank Beamer got out of there. Fuente didn't go well. They're horrible this year. Fine, but you get Syracuse then right after that. You're not putting yourself in a great position to make a bowl game. And I know you want the bowl game to be a given. You know, everyone wants to say, 6-6, they're going to go to a bowl game at least. But with the exception of the Joe Tiller years, that has never been the case for Purdue. And I think you want to put yourself in the most favorable position to at least go to a bowl game. Next year, what's the most likely outcome out of that non-conference schedule? I think it's far too early to tell, especially now in the portal era where you don't know what Fresno State, Virginia Tech, or Syracuse will really look like. All three will have the same coach, but what are those rosters going to look like? You don't really know. What's Purdue going to look like? I mean, if there's no portal and you're just going off what's on the roster, it's not going to be a great Purdue team. They lose a ton after this season. And I don't want to dwell on that now because this could be a really fun year, but Purdue loses a lot. You're going to have a first-time quarterback with either a handful of snaps of college experience or a couple snaps against Indiana State of college experience. So the portal is going to be critical to help you put together a competitive roster. You have a brutal Big Ten schedule, and you gave yourself a pretty difficult non-conference slate. I think it's just putting yourself in a bad position because a good schedule is fun. It's fun to look at it and say, oh, we schedule tough until you're 1-2 with Wisconsin coming to town. Until you're finishing the season at 5-7 and playing some good football. And you think, oh, man, instead of that trip to Virginia Tech, what if we brought the Sycamores up north? What if we brought over Brock Spack's Redbirds at Illinois State? What if we just would have played Akron instead of Syracuse? Or instead of, Fresno State, who came in and got you, we played someone bad like Bowling Green. That's just where I lie. I am in the belief that you need to schedule to get to a bowl game every year, and that sometimes the Big Ten break isn't going to be great. Of course, the big question is, is Jeff Brom going to be around still? Plenty of talk about that. I mean, it's impossible not to hear it. That's a big question too. So you look at this 2023 schedule, man, I think it's tough. I think it's a tough year for Purdue to get that schedule, but anything can happen. I said the same thing about the 2017 schedule when Purdue had to go to Missouri. They had to play Louisville. They had Michigan, all those in September, and everything worked out just fine for Purdue that year. They got to a bowl. This will certainly be a better team. Anything can happen, but man, Purdue got a tough break with that schedule. That's all I have for you today. Start sending me questions for the basketball preview show. That's probably the biggest and longest podcast I do every year. So send those my way. That'll be to you early next week. I'm excited for that. We'll be back as well previewing Iowa next week, full game preview. So thank you to all of you for listening. I appreciate you all so much. We will be back next week. Until then, enjoy the bye week. Find some good football to watch. Enjoy it and take care.